Yeah, cool. So this is Jan.
This is Łukasz.
And we're going to walk you through our experiences on working remotely. Starting with a question to you. How many of you have ever tried it? Oh wow, this is unnecessary conversation. Oh, we're done then.
And who of you prefers working from the office? From the typical office with typical team, etc. Okay.
Perfect. So my point of view is from a person who hires people who work remotely for some startups, and
I mostly work remotely, but I also started two remote first companies. But I was always focused on technology, and this guy is focused mostly on business and running the company.
Cool. So we're gonna give you two different perspectives on this.
Yeah.
Cool. So with that behind us, what is a remote work? So, yeah, basically for me the definition is where most of the communication happens over the internet. Also, it should happen asynchronously, so you don't have expectation from anyone to respond immediately. Furthermore, it's not like your home office on Fridays, with some companies practice. And also, one of the key components of this is that people are self-motivated, and they can self-organize their time and manage their time properly in any way, like whether this is GTD or I don't know, over emails or whichever way. It's important that they have enough of that to drive through their daily tasks and routines. Do you want to add to it?
I can just say that I found on Wikipedia Polish meaning of how to translate remote work into Polish, and it's telepraca. For me, the most important difference between remote work and, I would say, working from the office is that, remote workers are less likely to be, I would say, typical code monkeys who just close tickets, create pull requests, and are, I would say, passive in their day-to-day work. Okay, so that's. Some basic advantages of remote work are just, no commuting, and I think it's obvious to most of you, so I just go pretty quickly for these points. For me, third point was the most important. At some point I spent like 6 or 7 years of my career, first 7 years of my career as a typical Java developer working at the office, and I decided to go remote because I wanted to have more free time for myself. When I started working remotely for several companies, I realized that this third point is the most important, profound change for me. Finally, somebody is not checking how much time I'm spending at the office, but instead they just pay me for getting things done, and that's something I love the most about remote working. And the fourth thing is when you hire people, it's way easier to find good, talented, experienced programmers and specialists of any kind, actually in IT. I can give 2 examples. I was, I think, employee number 2 in Scala C, which is with this guy, by the way, Batam, so their founder, Łukasz, started the company when Scala was not a popular language, and there were very few Scala developers on the market, and I was thinking to myself, he's mad. It will not work out. Everyone is looking for Scala devs, but they are nowhere to be found. But we both quickly realized that there are many Scala developers living in very small villages, and they have completely no interest of moving to Warsaw, London, Zurich, or wherever else. And on our company's Slack, I saw many photos like their views from Windows, where instead of blocks in the middle of the city, you see mountains, snow, etc., etc. Yeah, that's actually. And second thing is that they usually charge less for an hour than people living in London.
Right. So on that point, I can also tell you that when in 2013 I was starting the first startup in Berlin, Germany, one of the main components was that some of the well-established companies, some of the well-established market names, such as Amazon, Google, or whatnot, could pay any salary. So as a company who is just starting, you need to compete on some other terms. You can't compete with a salary because you don't have that level of founding, or it's too high risk for you to basically match the same salary. What I discovered is there is a limit to the salary where people are willing to be happy about, and above, it's unnecessary to pay more, also given the taxes and the consumption of taxes, where they will choose freedom to work from Malaga when it's winter in here, or basically, in their time frame, in their working hours, whenever it suits them better. This was one of the biggest discoveries and wow moments, also for myself, when I started to work remotely as a developer and then also build the team, the remote team for that company. When we realized that, most people, there is a specific border and line to what is the desired salary versus the desired freedoms and the possibility of spending that money and facilitating your time in a better way. So in other words, we decided to put together what it means to us. So to me, personally, what remote working allows me to do is better organize my time and therefore my life and work around certain time frames. So for instance, what I mean by this is that I work best as a coder between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. on my local time. Everything before and after, well, after I sleep, before there's too many distractions, but ultimately that window between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. gives me the best performance, gives me the best focus, and it's my best time when I'm able to deliver best work, quality and all of that, and I'm able to focus just on this. There's no other distractions.
So for me, it's our speaker notes. We converted it to a slide. So for me, it's first of all, I love I love working for results, not for and not count how many hours I spent working. Second thing is that I have more free time and flexible hours. So for example, I spent last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, traveling in the south of Poland, looking for home and parcel to buy, and climbing in the evenings, and in the middle of the day I was working from a house in the middle of mountains, and I was watching deers passing nearby, and and that's something much more better than working from here actually. Okay, let's move.
Carry on.
Now, the perfect remote worker. There are subtle differences between people working from the office, especially in big companies, and people working remotely, where there is a high probability in any remote team that you will never ever meet any of your teammates. It's a bad thing, but we'll come to it in a second. So, first of all, be visible and accessible. It's very important. I learned it in my first remote contract. Obvious thing is that when you work remotely, there is less communication. I would say it's more substantial communication
and also contained.
But there's a less communication. So, but in order for people to trust you, to know what you are capable of, you need to communicate loud and clear almost, I think every day, at least once a day. But you are alive, you are doing, you are bringing value for the company, and I learned it the hard way when I disappeared for like 1 or 2 weeks doing something. And later I came back with a huge pull request, and everybody said, "Who's that guy? What were you doing, by the way? Oh, are you?" My manager said, "Oh, you're still here," etc., etc. That wasn't the best thing. So later I just it was a good lesson for me. So later I just started splitting my work in smaller chunks. To be able to show some progress every day. That's first thing. Second thing, I was also spent more time chatting with people, putting some stupid photos and memes on a random channel on Slack, etc., etc. So be proactive. That's actually the same thing. You need to spend more time. In helping other people than waiting for somebody until that guy asks you for help. On your topic in 100%, that's pretty obvious because there is no office where you can get to come to the desk, other guy's desk, and could you explain me this thing and so on, because this guy is in China and he basically can answer your one question per 24 hours because you ask a question, go to sleep, he wakes up, answers a question, etc., etc. So it's not that easy. Second thing is about owning your topic in 100% also means write a good documentation, because other people will use it and they might not have opportunity to meet you ever. That's the much, but it's very valuable skill for any kind of worker. Okay, it's maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in a remote environment, it's even more important that you care and understand the product fully. So it's not just about, I code from A to B, but it's actually to understand the context, to be able to propose different solutions, and to be able to actually question and exercise a healthy questioning of someone's way of approaching, or a solution that is being presented to you by a management, or your product manager or colleagues. To be skeptical in a healthy way and provide a constructive feedback that pushes the product forward, but not in a way where you just question it and offer some sort of idea for people to figure it out, but rather in a way where you present your own initiative and say, like, well, would you rather go with A or B? Because those are two options that you have, or those are two options that I researched and you could go on with. Which then it makes it immediately easier for your team for your colleagues to accept or just agree on, like, in the context of the conversation, say, oh, okay, perfect, you thought this through, let's go with B instead of A because I see the immediate benefits. It's much easier to focus on just this limited, build on trust, limited exchange of your opinions around your context. It's very important.
Actually, could I add something?
Of course.
Because I would like also to say that when the remote work would not be suitable for you. I met a few guys, I just have a few stories. First of all, I met a few guys during my career who were very deep, very serious, I'm not sure how to say it, introverts. They just really disliked talking to other people, communicating to other people, etc. And a few of them said, I'm going to find a remote job. But their motivation was, instead of, like me, they didn't want to have less time spent working and being paid for results, not man hours, but instead they wanted to have even less communication with people, and this is bad because first of all, if they don't communicate, then there is no trust, and it can first of all, it's bad for the company because they don't know what the employees are doing, what such employee is doing, and it's also bad for them because that's the title of the talk. Beware the dragons, which is a section from the book called Remote. And when you don't communicate with other people, when you do your job, and you are totally lonely, then bad thoughts and bad feelings enter your mind, and you just for apparently unknown reasons get really high levels of stress, which is bad for everyone. Okay, let's go.
Cool. Similarly to what the perfect employee who should be working remotely, who could be working remotely is, we have a profile or an idea of what the company, of a remote company is, and what no-goes for the remote company practices are. So such a company should be remote from the beginning. So not necessarily an entire company, obviously, like I don't know if it's a market-specific company, the sales team or marketing team could be in the office, but the tech team, the product team, and the dev team, whichever way you're gonna call them, they should all have the same standard, okay? Because the minute you have a part of the tech team in the house and part of the team externally, what's gonna happen is there will be discrepancies in communication, there will be discrepancies in exchange of knowledge and whatnot. So that's basically no double standards for having, like, local team and a remote team. We're not talking about a situation where you have a local team and then you hire some agency externally. That's not the same, okay? Those are people who are fully contracted and fully dedicated, and that's their sole work, that's their only responsibility, that work, that piece of engagement that they're having with this one company. Also, it requires companies to be 100% transparent and 100% feedback driven, and you wouldn't believe how hard that is. Because a lot of companies are not like this. So imagine that you have a full understanding of what your rundown is. So the company tells you, look, we have 6 months of cash, and in 6 months, ultimately, either we get an extra cash injection, we'll, break even, or something else happens, or you guys will have to start looking for another job. That's a very, very challenging approach, and I don't know a lot of founders in the startup industry who would actually be that honest. Also feedback driven. As a remote workers who don't fully participate in the office and potentially in some sort of dynamics or even frequently politics of the office, they have a different feedback dynamics. They're going to be very direct, and company needs to really encourage this and accept this. That is, again, something which is very not so popular, because a lot of companies have certain kind of approach that, okay, we're here, whatever these people are seeing, they're just seeing tiny bit of the picture. Whatever their feedback is, it's not as valid as whoever else is giving us feedback inside, or the client is always right, even if the context is not correct. Because the key here is that we either have to correct the context for the remote people, or actually their unique perspective, and this attachment, emotional disattachment and whatnot, is giving you just pure solution without any emotions, without any unnecessary political load of how you have to carry it over to people to be heard, which is such a unique thing if you think about it, because most companies require people to go through a specific process, which is there just to filter out emotional load. Good example is actually 360. I don't know if you guys heard about this methodology. It's an idea to actually ask people about their top 3 for each employee every now and then. You ask for top 3 positive things, what you really enjoyed about that person, what you really liked them for, or what they were really good at, what they tried for and then 3 things they could improve about. Think about that, because it's not like what do they suck at. It's like what could they improve at, right? So it's in the context of a positive approach where you're trying to build their skill, where you're trying to help them grow, okay? And then overall summary and maybe NPS from 1 to 10, just to give you some sort of standardization and to observe the traceable growth of a person. different companies use different methodologies for doing this. Would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that my favorite type of company is a remote company which has offices. I think Telnix is one of one of such companies. I also my former job, my former company, which I co-founded, we also had an office in Warsaw. And the idea is that we came to the office when we had to. We had some hardware, and we had to work physically with hardware, do some soldering, etc. And when we had to do it, we were coming to the office. Second thing was that there was actually one guy who was coming to the office because he wanted to be among people. He didn't like working alone from home. He was living alone, and he said, "No, I need to meet somebody from time to time." So he was every day at the office, and he was very sad when nobody else was coming. So for me, that's the best type of the company. That if you need some if you need meet somebody, or you do some brainstorming or other things. It's the next slide. Exactly. This is a list of things which don't work out well in remote work, which is when you need some kind of common space where you meet with other people. So first of all, brainstorming. When you stay at the whiteboard or blackboard, if you are at the university, and you need to, figure out something. And actually, I checked on the internet somewhere, and I think I saw some header from some research that 80% of information coming between us and these guys is non-verbal. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but definitely significant percent of communication is non-verbal. Otherwise, we'll just stay now on Slack and just we'll be chatting. So that's the first thing. Second thing, workshops. That's quite a similar thing. Time zones, your team which you work with, your team should work roughly in the same time. I can, as a bad example, I can say that a few years ago I had a job interview with a company from Sydney, Australia, and it started for me at midnight, and for these guys, I don't know, it was 9 or 10 a.m. and I was totally tired after a very long day, like 10 hours of coding a day, a bit of rest, and again interview, and I was getting angry because these guys at the other side of the of the planet just came to the office in the morning with coffee. Okay, so maybe let's just ask you one more question. I said, oh my God, no, why? and it ended about around 2 a.m. and it was quite exhausting. I got the job. It was worth it, but I wouldn't want to do it once again. Second thing is, like I mentioned before, but when you work in general, when you work for people from Australia or China, then that job was in Sydney, so I traveled to Sydney and I stayed there for a while. But in general, when you work with people from the other side of the planet, then it's very hard to communicate with them because you need to schedule a calls for the times at which you usually go to bed or wake up, and or these guys have the same problem, and it doesn't work out well. And juniors. Usually I would suggest that if you are a junior, if it's your first job, then go to the office, because you will you will hear people talking about technical stuff and learning from them just by, I would say, by osmosis. And I think you said that you do an onboarding for up to 6 months. Yes. I also know people who started working remotely right away from the beginning after university, but it's quite well thing. In general, I suggest you to stay at the office for a while. Well, that's the big problem. Many people, including me, try to introduce remote working in a typical office-based company, and actually, maybe this is possible, but I don't know how. I have never heard a success story of a company which transformed into a remote-first company. It's hard. People are maybe, as you mentioned before, maybe starting a new team, separate team is a good thing, but it also may cause some problems.
Right. Yeah. Let me quickly address this again. So, one of the most important things for me is that developers should really engage with the customer. It's critical that you fully understand the problem, not what the customer says what they want. In 9 out of 10 cases, what customer says they want is not what they really want, is what they think they want. So fully talking to them and presenting different ideas and understanding that they are describing a car but they will be completely happy with a bicycle is one of the things that only a person who is technically savvy can actually figure out. So for that reason, it's very important to have people interact also with customers, and that means a couple of things. That means for potentially bringing them to those places every now and then. It also means that, for example, for time zones, one of the things I practice is I never go beyond +1, -1 from wherever the HQ of the company is. All right, because in my practice that never worked. Because the difference in like what the example of Australia, I would never dare to try this, because it's just crazy also for us to trace, to review the pull requests, to have a look at the code that they delivered from a different perspective, to see if the tests are in place, to see what the feature does for the QA team, which is, for example, in a different time zone. For me, the perfect setup is -1 time zone maximum. So for example, something like my experience was actually with US, so we had most of the company and the team and an overall setup in Berlin, Germany, and then we had a team in the East Coast. We have some programmers from East Coast US, and that never worked out for us because the discrepancy between going online and then basically all the managers and PMs would have to stay till late in our time zone to basically feed them in the information. It didn't work out in the long term. Some of these people moved in to somewhere in Europe to just basically be compatible with that time zone requirement, and some of them just left the company. So it had to be like this. When it comes to juniors, I think that it's very important not to only onboard people on your business domain, also to check what they're actually capable of as a programmers, especially when they're at the beginning of their careers, but also to kind of teach them your culture, teach them the trust, show them that it's okay to not know things and formulate the questions properly. How do we use tools and how do we exchange knowledge? For instance, we have a weekly or twice a week occasion meeting where people can present different topics and learn from one another, even not on the topic of what the business domain is or what the company is working on, just in general, just to show, just to kind of infuse the culture where people are feeling safe about speaking about their weaknesses, for example. And once again, if the company is not fully believing in it, if your C-level people are not fully believing in remote first philosophy, that's not gonna work out. Because one way or another, there will be some shortcuts taken, and I have seen things falling apart in some companies which were trying to do it, in some big organizations, some first level massive corporates. The reason why it didn't work out is because they were always prioritizing certain work over another, and they would end up with multiple parallel roadmaps and multiple parallel teams actually working with the same item from different angles. Where eventually some stakeholder would say, "Are you guys crazy? You're just basically spending money 3 different ways on the same topic." It just doesn't make any sense. So I've seen that actually falling apart many different ways, and I believe that the company is either 100% with it or not at all. It shouldn't just try like, oh, let's try 50%. I think one of the introduction that you could try is like, let's set up a new team and they're going to work on a new product entirely, and there's some sort of interaction like over an API or it's a microservices infrastructure. So we can try that, but even then, it's a high risk for, will someone not try to pull that in internally because one person, one manager, or one high-level employee / C-level person will not be fully understanding what the benefits are. That's one of the challenges. Okay, how do you actually do this? How do you make that happen? People frequently are asking, like, can you really figure out your day through simple tools like, depending on the company, like Slack plus Skype plus Hangouts, different configurations. I personally use Zoom, but on purpose I didn't put it in here. Can you really create a knowledge base according to your Google Docs or wiki pages or like ticketing tracking tools? There's a lot of different methodologies and different ideas how you can structure it, but ideally what we try to do, and this is what I wanted to share with you, how I structure it, is that everything oscillates around a task force. When a selected group of people meet in Slack, and there's a group for this, and they basically focus on solving a particular problem. And that involves every single person from any domain. So, I don't know, one marketing person, one salesperson, and a programmer, and a PM, and a designer. And they try to work in a Google Sprint way. I don't know if you had the pleasure to read that book, but if you didn't, then have a look at it. That's Design Sprint by Google. It's amazing. How in a couple of interactions and short interactions, you're trying to give each other different angle at the same problem to realign and actually move forward in finding the solution. Then for sharing purposes, for documenting purposes, I would prefer Google Docs, but it can be really anything. And GitHub is my favorite, not because it's where we store the code, that's obvious, but we use GitHub projects as a Trello replacement, where you have all your swim lanes and you can see in what state your task is. We also have a specific definition of labels in GitHub where you can trace the status of a task also outside of projects, which is important because you can have a front-end and back-end project. But you can actually trace things like, was it in progress? Is it done by definition of done of developer? Is it done by definition of done of product manager, which that closes it, and so on and so forth, which is one of the most important things because it's just a single tool and it solves three quite complex topics for us. So code control and code quality check, because QAs are also around it. But we actually, within the companies that I work with, we actually onboard every single business person to it. So they're aware of swim lanes and the Trello-like flow, and they're aware of things like Kanban, where they know how they prioritize tasks or business prioritize tasks. They understand how then the development team and product team will pick them up. They have a full awareness of how this whole system works. It's not like, go and figure it out with your remote guys. The whole company is on the same page with how the flow works. And one of the things which is something which I had to learn hard way is you can't just rely fully 100% on remoteness. People build relationships, and those relationships and that connection requires eventually meeting every now and then and having some, crazy fun in town, whether in here or somewhere else, whatever the office is. So what I recommend doing is twice a year, every single quarter, bring everyone together, And if you think about it, it's really not that expensive. I know a lot of companies who do it, and it sounds crazy, like if you bring 100 or 200 or 300 people in the same location, or for holiday somewhere. But actually, the benefit of that in the long term are crazy positive. And I have seen a lot of companies that really, thrive on this. Both in Europe and also Silicon Valley, they are all really practicing this and achieving great results. Would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I can just reiterate your points, but but this list of tools is okay for us. It's obvious, but for business people, it's like they say, "Oh my God, what it is," and they really don't have no idea how useful it is, etc., etc. They don't work this way. And frequent meetups, it's one more point about the fact that the communication in remote companies is the most important thing. You need to take care of communication regardless of whether you are a CEO of the company, founder of the company, or just low-level employee. Frequent meetups open new communication channels between people, and it's a very valuable thing. It's hard to measure it, how much value it brings in I don't know, euro or dollars for the company, but for me it's totally worth it. Let's see that thing. That's the Bible of remote workers and remote companies. If you want to know more, then this is the book to check. I highly recommend it. You can reading it takes about 20 minutes or a couple of hours, because left side, as far as I remember, left side of the book is just short version of the full text on the right side of the book. So if you have a little time, you can just do it like this, and you are done, and you know everything about remote working in theory, of course.
Yes, and take some of this stuff. This was also one of the biggest eye-openers for me, this book, but also take some of it with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, this is very flexible, and you can pick bits and pieces for your own needs and apply them to your own organization. Also according with the level of, let's say, progressive thinking about remoteness across your whole organization, and how much commitment you got from your own C-level people to actually try this. So keep this in mind, because if you go through the whole book, some of it is really radical, and even bits and pieces from the book we do not practice on a daily basis. Okay, just so you keep that in mind, that it's just a guidance, and you can choose elements of it for your own needs. Cool. So that concludes it. Do you guys have any questions of how do we do it? Yeah.
I have a question. So one of the points you mentioned was brainstorming. So when, let's say, you have a new piece of functionality that you need to implement, and you need to, kind of crunch it into smaller pieces and plan the work. How do you do that? Like if you're remote,
right.
Assuming you're remote. I don't know. Maybe you get together, but.
Right.
Do you have any tools or practices that you can use?
Sure. Maybe I go first, and then yeah. So ultimately, there's always a bunch of people who are the connector between business and the tech team, and they try to crawl through this together first in the office, whatever the HQ is. So in the case of the company I'm engaged with now, it's Berlin. Okay. Afterwards, there's a set of workshops which happen over Zoom. And people go in circles where there's someone who always moderates that meeting, so no one is talking over one another. Also, people are always encouraged to mute when they don't talk, so there is no background noises of a crying baby or someone trying to dig hole in the wall in their home, which happens in the past. And ultimately, you go through this process a couple of times till you figure out the solution, till you're able to document and GitHub issues and assign them across people, milestones and whatnot. But also till everyone is happy to acknowledge that this is the right solution. And everyone feels safe to propose these. Some of that stuff also happens asynchronously on the task force channel, which is specifically dedicated for that topic in Slack, just for that topic, with that selected group of people who specialize in that topic, who either carry the knowledge from the past or either participate in, let's say it's a second stage of the same task, so they already participate in the task, or they have other proposals. Everyone is welcomed and invited to participate, but as a person who owns it from a BO, from business owner perspective, you have to know where to draw a line so you don't end up with a whole company in one channel debating some details of some feature, okay? There's a subtle line, and it takes a different learnings and different requirements from the company perspective to decide what is where this line is, before you feel like, okay, it's chaotic or there's not enough people to participate in that particular topic.
Okay. What about visualizing the work somehow? When you're on, you say you use Zoom for kind of calls. So do you have is there a whiteboard feature, or I don't know, technique?
Sure.
Do you use that, or how do you visualize the work? Because what I like about being in the same space with other people is, I have a whiteboard. We can put on some stickers,
Sure.
sticky notes, and reorganize them.
Sure.
And
Of course, you can always screen share. Most people also use whiteboards, and they screen share with the camera on the whiteboards, where you can actually debate, draw, and discuss. We also do product demos every end of the week. We also do screencasts, so people can share what they have achieved with other people, and they can watch that at their own convenience. Some of it is being used also as a documentation or a message towards customers. Yeah, that's basically it.
It is said that the team's value is greater than the sum of its parts.
Mhm.
So in the setup, when you have people working asynchronously across the world, where is this surplus? Do you see it, or this greater value, or is it just the sum?
For me, it's a greater value because you team. Bunch of people becomes a
Is there
team.
any I would add another question to that. Another question: is there a real teamwork here? A space for
Yes, because this bunch of people becomes a team when they start to communicate, and you have a communication. You need to take care of it, but still you have a communication. And
the communication in terms of what, like passing information. So do this for me, or do that for me, or here's my chunk of work right now. You can proceed.
No. That's delegation. That almost doesn't happen. Not in within those
To answer
passwords.
this question, we have to think why this value is greater than the sum of these parts.
Very simple.
So
Because from my perspective, it's very simple. Sorry, it's because people care so much for the trust you give them that they give you back their commitment to also not only follow up and say like, oh, here, go. Sorry, I'm waiting for him. He's my impediment. That never happens when the people understand they fail and succeed together. And that single task force, which can be one or two people to half a dozen, understands that they need to sync up, and the task force syncs up every day, and they understand who is the let's say impediment in the given moment, and they're all going to help it because the whole team fails or succeeds. That goes with another point, which is beyond this presentation, which is in that company we also don't have deadlines, and it's still extremely successful, delivering everything ahead of what would be the assumed time, because people actually think about it's more important to help my colleague than it is to deliver another dozen of topics just to meet some OKR or some other target artificially, and that also requires people to create those work in the micro chunks for the team to process and work on.
Exactly. I have very good example of from today and Friday and Thursday when we started talking with. I do backend work in my current job, and there are two mobile teams and yet another backend team, and we started discussion about format of suboptimal, I would say, format of data returned by one of endpoints from my system, and we had long discussion before any tickets in Jira were created, who and how. Who should fix it and how should it be fixed? Whether just mobile clients should be more flexible, or should I change it in my endpoints, or maybe I should ask other people from working on the other side of the service who are sending me data to my system. And so we're adding new people to the discussion, and today we got we reached a consensus that I should do the work. And now I created a few tickets in Jira, and now they will be scheduled somehow by our manager. And next I would say stage of work will start soon when our manager will come and tell you, you do this thing, you do the other part, and this guy does the other part.
For me, the fascinating bit is the psychological aspect. That the more trust you give people, the more dedication you get back.
But this is interesting because you mentioned that the surplus, these things that make this greater than the sum of its parts, is the trust, and now you said dedication. Previously, you said commitment.
Yes.
Pretty much the same.
Yes.
I was thinking more, it's of course my personal opinion, so it can differ. I was thinking more that the reason why the value is greater than the sum of its parts is this huge bandwidth of communication, that the mentoring that happens, because I can see a person struggling. I can see what this person is doing. So for instance, I can ask, do you need some help? Can we work on this together? Let's do pair programming. Let's do mock programming. Let's do, can you tell me what's your contract for that? What's your idea for that? Let's try to draw this. And this max bandwidth communication makes us work faster, more efficient, and makes both people learn.
So I agree 75%, because you say greater bandwidth. For me, you have less occasions to communicate, therefore you're going to use them much more on that point. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to think for what that person may need before that person asks you. That what ends up happening, in my experience. Is you'll think, okay, I got this endpoint, should I think of exceptions and validation? Yeah, I should. I'll ask them what they want. You know, imagine there is a front end and back end of some sort, and I don't know, in our case we use Elixir at the back end and Ember at the front. So imagine you need to define that contract and the exchange of information of how the validation would work. You could propose that to your front ender. When he responds, he already responds from those A and B options. And of course he's free to say like, no, none of this is all shit, I want C. But at least you have this as a pre-assumption that you will come up with an initiative, what that person might need, and will think about it carefully. And that is the key.
And also, if you are stuck on something, you need to clearly communicate it. Guys, help! I'm stuck.
Yes.
Please do something with it.
That's interesting. I'm not sure I would call it an advantage of the remote work, because previously I'm trying to play a devil's advocate here. I've worked remotely for a long time, and my two key observations are that mentoring sucked. So I haven't seen a lot of efficient mentoring. So what I didn't like at one of your slides is that it's an issue for juniors. It's not only an issue for juniors. Actually, the mentoring happens for all the way. And the other observation is that, and this is quite sad, and I haven't seen it on the slides, that all the communication deficiencies people have in them, they become multiplied. And people are not growing in terms of awareness, because there is no one to actually sometimes think them a little bit, because this communication we lack this bandwidth.
I agree with you 100%, but to clarify, for me, junior is not someone who doesn't know how to code, or codes just very, for a couple of months. For me, the junior is a person who is not able to organize their time, who's not able to properly communicate and so on, who's not properly thrown into a problem, will basically, panic, or won't be able to find a solution or communicate with other people on their own. That's a junior person. I know people who code for 20 years and I wouldn't call them senior, just for that reason. So this is what the summary is, and maybe that wasn't clear. So yeah, that's the clarification. It's not about the coding skill; it's about your communication skill. Exactly, it's the full package, so to speak. So for me, if someone is a senior programmer, they can look after juniors in a sense that they will be mentoring them, that they will be able to set the guidance and so on. Whether this is remote or in the same location, it's irrelevant. So around the task forces, when the people are coupled together, so to speak, to create this kind of work task force to solve a particular problem or a challenge or a bug, or communicate with the client and iterate over it, we try to always pick people in a way where there's at least one person who perfectly knows the topic and everyone who shows natural interest in it. So if we're opening up a new front in some sort of AI implementation, there's always a guy who did it before, and there's a bunch of people who are really into it, because there's no benefit for the company to have those silos of some knowledge anyway. So whether you're remote or in the same place, you want to have that broadened knowledge exchange anyway, and keep it super contained is extremely beneficial, because now you have one guy potentially touring two people through the same problem instead of your other dozen of developers all at the same time, which could potentially happen in the same location. And that isolation gives you laser focus. And the laser focus gives these people the opportunity to grow, and appreciate the fact that they're given that time for just that particular scenario to actually try that. That's my experience.
I have a question. You said that basically, if you have remote workers, you have senior developers, and that if you have people who are working remotely, they are usually senior developers, and most of the time they are making very few business decisions. And I'm wondering if you have any tool to keep track of those business decisions they are making.
So that's not entirely correct. The business decisions are made always with business owner. whoever that is. It could be a head of product, it could be a head of sales who just said, look, if we are able to create 1,000 fake accounts for all these prospects we're trying to pitch at right now, and then our sales team, we do some sort of seed script and we fit it in with nice data and we're going to present that to our customers out of nowhere, they're going to be very happy. So the developer always got this perception of this is what our boundary of our problem is. He's always able to go outside of the boundary with a counter proposal. When he says, look, you know what, we could actually scrape this data from these two other sites and they're going to give us a summary, and that summary will be much more valuable, or aggregated data which will be much more valuable than some sort of fake seed. And then the salesperson or the sales owner, the C-level salesperson who didn't know about it is usually like, oh, okay, that's great. Sometimes they ask how long would it take, most of the time not, and they authorize this kind of work. So it comes through a conversation.
Yeah, if you're at the office, you can go to this person usually. He's in his office and you can discuss it at the given moment.
That's not true in 90% of cases, because the person who is responsible for sales will be at the customers' meetings, at the conferences, most of the time. Like for example, in the company I'm speaking of, most of the people are traveling the world anyway. The salespeople, they're pitching to the customers, they're closing contracts, they're filling in their pipe drive to show how where are they in the process. They're organizing new cold leads for further calls. So it's extremely hard to actually get their attention. And that is me speaking from a perspective of a person who used to work in an office, who used to work in an offline environment where salespeople are in a completely different level, and what their daily activities are, and how much time they will be able to spend for you. So actually being async team perfectly works for these people as well, because after, 6 p.m., when all their calls are done, when all their summaries are done, they find the time to respond to your messages and inquiries and potentially address the issues that came across from either side.
Okay, so another question, do you record your conversations? If you have a meeting that is, it sounds
Yes.
important,
Yes.
do you do it in documentation, recordings?
Yes, we do meeting minutes, and also Google Hangouts offer automatic transcription of your voice into text, which is amazing. Yeah. And we turn that into meeting minutes, yes. I highly recommend that too.
So, question: how to find a good remote first companies work for? If there is like a lot of advertisement offers to work to remote work, but I'm not sure whether they're looking for really remote workers or just cheaper workforce from overseas.
99% of our programmers are being paid what the market value for the local market is. So for example, people working from Poland or Ukraine or Ireland or Romania for my Berlin company are being paid what the senior developer in Berlin would get. 60,000 euro and above.
It's actually it differs. You just need to talk to each company. For example, I work for a British company and I have more or less British salary, but there are also counterexamples when companies hire people from Ukraine and Poland just to get smaller costs. So
I have to do my due diligence.
But I give you a cool statement. In 2016 or 17 in December, I was at the conference with Google and Amazon, and they said a really amazing statement. They said that by 2020, all technical colleges in Europe won't be able to provide enough programmers for just top three companies and employers in Europe, which are obviously those huge US corporates like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Google, whatever else, Amazon, top 3, top 5. The point is, startups are born in this environment.
I also, I won't be able to give you exact numbers, but from year to year, I can see that this difference between salaries from people from London and Kyiv is this gap is I would say closing.
Internet is an amazing tool.
But the salary is not my main concern, but the way that management is treating you as some remote guy from Poland, or something like this, or I'm like a regular employee like everyone else.
Go to
Because, like you said, it is very hard for the companies to do remote first and
check the LinkedIn and see where people are based, whether they are spread out on many time zones, or maybe everyone comes from the one city and you will be the only guy from somewhere else.
But usually when you ask them about their model, they will give you an answer.
Exactly.
Whether it's remote first,
Yeah.
or whether it's an island model, satellite model, so these are different models.
Yeah,
Exactly.
just talk to these guys. Nobody's going to lie to you because it's not in their interest. So.
Yeah, it's going to always come up. And also check Glassdoor, where you can see employees you know, writing about the company in an anonymous way, what really goes on there.
Yeah, exactly. I check Glassdoor every time I'm looking for work.
Cool. There was another question from over there.
Yes, I was asked about this feature you mentioned about the Google Hangout. It's like only in paid version. Is there an option to get it on like regular Hangout? Because it's very interesting.
I honestly don't know. I have it, and we use GDocs for business.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have it in the private version. Also, what you need to know is Google structures their offerings for a different market. So for example, I have my Gmail and most of my Google tools. I created my accounts when I was living in Ireland. So what happens is I have a lot of features ahead of my friends who have their accounts in Poland. So maybe that's also part of that reason for that. Yeah. Sorry, I really don't know. I can just show you how the feature works, but if you don't have it, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I'm thinking a lot about feedback loops these days, and you mentioned some, like the 360 reviews and having a Kanban board and things like that. I think I heard maybe OKRs weren't such a great experience. I'm curious about that, and I'm also curious what other feedback loops do you prefer to have for remote workers, and especially, one for a company that's part remote, part centralized.
Yeah, remember that thing that I mentioned about task forces? Each task force at the end of its existence, which frequently is 1 week, less likely 2 or more weeks, but usually about 1 week, gets an NPS survey towards everyone. How likely would you recommend working with this group of people from 1 to 10, and why yes or why not? And it's anonymous. So people can say, well, working with Łukasz in that task force really sucked. I really don't want to work with him again, And then the manager can scratch his head and say, well, maybe Łukasz is not such a great fit for this setup, and that happens. I've been through the places where we had a bit of a drama and so on, and you could clearly see, okay, this guy is a genius, but he really can't work with other people in this kind of setup. It happens. You see that. There are experiences like that. So that's first of all. And second of all, we have a feature-wise, company-wise NPS every now and then, and also after each. So I said Kanban, but it's actually Scrumban, because it's Scrum for the business team, so they better understand what gets released in what time frame. While the developers actually work without deadlines, but in a Kanban board way. And then still that leads to every 3 weeks we have a retrospective meeting, and then people can really talk about starts, stops, and continues for the future. So what should we stop doing, what we should continue doing, and what we should start doing. And all of these tools together create an environment and culture where we constantly focus on self-improvement. And that's like a motto, like a doctrine of the company. No matter what happens, you have to improve as a team. You have to grow as a team.
You're lucky because in my companies for which I worked, usually everyone forgot about giving feedback. And I always say to everyone, that was a good job, or no, you could have done it better, regardless of whether it was my teammate, somebody from my team, or my boss. I don't care actually. I'm just trying to be honest, but well, for some reason it doesn't come back to me. I'm asking, how did I perform? Oh, yeah, pretty well, thanks. Yeah,
that's also very important. Giving credit when it's due. It's very important.
Yeah.
It's very important. We call it honey shower. Give someone an honey shower. Cool. Is there any more questions?
So I just wanted to say a big thank you to you because
Thank you.
I learned a lot from you today.